There are 6 messages in bottles that you can find in Fallout 4. I covered one of these bottles when I did a video on the Makra fish packing plant, but today I'm going to show you all 6, and together we'll try to figure out what they mean. You stumble upon the first one by walking northeast of Crater House. Here we find the bottle half submerged in the sand containing the note, "Trapped for days." The message inside is one of the longest we find in these bottles, which is a bummer because the paper texture is half ripped, which means we don't get the whole message. However, taking a look at the in-game files, we can find what the whole message was supposed to say. "I've been trapped in this boat for days. There was some kind of tidal wave that came from the west. It flipped us over. Looks like I'm the only one that made it, if you can consider my current situation making it. I somehow still have air to breathe. I guess that means the boat must still be on the surface. Please, if you get this note, I need help." Once you finish reading the note, a miscellaneous quest appears in your quest log. Thankfully, we get a map marker, which appears on our compass pointing us in the right direction. Otherwise, it would be practically impossible to find these destinations. It's a good idea to bring the rescue diver suit that you get from Far Harbor with you on these quests, as you're going to be doing a lot of swimming, or you can make good use of the Aqua Boy or Aqua Girl perk. So the message tells of a man who's trapped underneath his overturned ship. He survives on the air remaining in the bubble trapped under his boat. I think we can assume that the blast that he refers to is one of the nukes detonating in Boston, possibly one of the ones that made the glowing sea. It's interesting that these impacts would have created a tidal wave strong enough to capsize ships close enough to the shore. To find this man, we swim almost due east. After a short while, we reach the destination, but we don't see an overturned boat. This means that the man was wrong. His boat was not on the surface. It must be a bit deeper. Diving down, and after a short while, we come upon the wreck of a small white leisure yacht. It rests upside down on top of a pipe and an orange shipping container. Swimming underneath, you can swim through the door where we find the skeleton of a man. This is likely the man who wrote us the note. He probably shoved it in the bottle and then stuck it out the window, where it bobbed to the surface and floated ashore. But sadly, it looks like the air ran out and he died in his ship. In fact, we don't find any air in this compartment whatsoever. Looks like rough seas or some sort of turbulence had pushed it all back outside. In here we find a first aid kit on the wall and the reward steamer trunk filled with randomized loot. Looting this steamer trunk completes the miscellaneous quest. I explored the nearby pipe, but it doesn't seem to have any significance. It goes due east until you hit the border of the world. You can't go any farther. And then it goes due west until it passes through a brick wall. This brick wall is still far underwater. We're not looking at the side of a building here. This is some sort of pre-war drainage system that leads back to the mainland. The next note is on the beach near the Makra fish packing plant. This is the one I covered in a previous video, but I'll go ahead and go over it again here. To find the note, walk northeast of the fish packing plant. You'll see a nearby rowboat with plastic pumpkins inside. Here we find the second bottle with the note, "Difficult to kill." "Come out to the coast, we'll get together, have a few laughs." Savvy viewers will recognize this quote as a line Bruce Willis says in the movie Die Hard.
"Come out to the coast, we'll get together, have a few laughs."
Reading this note activates a marker on your compass, sending you out slightly southeast from this point. There is nothing on the surface of the water, and so you can dive to discover a skeleton in a bathtub with a teddy bear, a stack of duct tape, and a lighter. All of these objects are clear references to Die Hard. All of them are used by the main character at some point in the movie. Next to his body is the steamer trunk, filled with even more randomized loot. And once you loot it, you complete the miscellaneous quest. The next one is probably the trickiest to find. When you stand on the docks near the Nahant Oceanological Society, look due south. In the distance, you see a whole bunch of points of land kind of sticking out of the water. One of them has a broken fence on it. Walk south-southeast towards this little small island, and be careful not to disturb the Marlark nest. On the island, buried in the sand, we find the fourth bottle with the message, "X marks the spot." I swear that the treasure is real. They mentioned it on the television. I must paddle faster. As soon as you finish reading the note, Mirelurks spring up and attack. The message puts a marker on your map southwest of this very small island. This is one of the longest swims you're going to have to make to reach the destination. And once you get there, you have one of the deepest dives that you have to make to reach the ocean floor. At last, we find a rowboat partially submerged in the soil. Inside, we find the skeleton of a man next to a tool case and what apparently is the treasure in his steamer trunk. What's interesting is that we find 3 or 4 cinder blocks in the mud right around this rowboat. The first thing that springs to mind is that this may be a murder scene, and somebody put cinder blocks in the rowboat to cause it to sink. This man was out hunting treasure. He heard about a location on the television. He figured it must be true. I guess we are supposed to think that this steamer trunk was the buried treasure that he was searching for. He finally found it, brought it up to the surface, put it in his boat, and then something happened that caused his boat to sink, burying the treasure all over again. To find bottle number 4, head to the Boston airport and walk along the shore to the furthest most southeast corner. This one actually took me a little bit of hunting to find, but buried in the sand next to a shipping pallet and a large log is the 4th bottle on note. I thought I ate a fish today. It didn't taste right. I then realized while writing this that I ate my own hand. I think I'm losing it. Oh, right, okay. The title of this note was Need a Hand. Let's see if we can go give him a hand, but not a literal hand. We need our hands. The marker brings you southeast of this location. After a long swim, we have to dive to immediately stumble upon the wreckage of a Horizon Airlines flight. Entering the wreckage and swimming up the steps to the cockpit, we find a first aid kit on the wall and a big red steamer trunk. Looting this trunk completes the miscellaneous quest. But we don't find a skeleton. We don't find a lone hand. There is absolutely nothing left in this wreckage, and the wreckage is pretty large. There's a lot to explore here. The main fuselage of the aircraft is split into 2 sections. The first half that contains the cockpit and the chest, and the second half which contains nothing. Then there's also the wing. If you watched my video on the crashed flights of Fallout 4, we talked about how this commercial aircraft was a fixed-wing design that actually had the seats in the wings. It was nuclear-powered, it ran on nuclear fuel, and it was based on an early real design from the 1950s. You can find the single wing and the area where there are supposed to be seats, but we don't see any seats, we don't see any skeletons, no luggage, there's just nothing here. So this one really confuses me. Who is the guy that ate his own hand? Where did this note come from? Why did it direct us to this chest in an aircraft on the bottom of the sea? A lot of things don't make sense about this. Bottle number 5 takes us to the wreck of the FMS Northern Star. Walking southwest of the wreckage towards the abandoned lighthouse, we come upon a slew of Mirelurks. When you reach the lighthouse, face west and walk towards the half-buried red buoy. Right along the shore as you approach the buoy, we find the 5th bottle with the message, "Not going well." Inside, we find a simple 2-word message, "I'm screwed." This places a marker on your compass sending you due east of the dilapidated lighthouse. As you swim, you'll pass by some interesting sights. There's a rowboat next to a floating red buoy, and inside we find some old rotting food. Nothing else of much interest. And when we get there, we have to dive to find the stash. Once you get to the bottom, you find a series of connected pipes. The pipe has numerous splits. Looks like there is one bell-shaped reservoir at the end of the pipe. The pipe travels down into the ocean floor, where we find an orange buoy, and that's about it. On the end that has a round reservoir, we can follow that pipe down, and it actually ends with a grate, but we can't interact with the grate There's no way to enter. And yet the marker sends us here. After a while, you may notice a red hatch on the side of the pipe. If you open it, you find the man who was screwed. On the wall of a submerged pipe, we strangely find a first aid kit, which is weird. And next to the skeleton of the man who apparently wrote that message, we find the steamer trunk, filled with all sorts of goodies. Looting this completes the miscellaneous quest. This is another really weird encounter. I mean, there's no story here. It's 2 words. I am screwed. From those 2 words, we're somehow supposed to divine that there's a man buried in a pipe underwater just in this location next to a steamer trunk and a first aid kit? How in the world could anyone have figured this out without the map marker? Just seems like a bizarre encounter to add to the game. The 6th and final bottle is one that you probably have found in your own game, because this one is at the castle. If you head to the shore next to the southeast bastion, you find a bottle with the message, "Predator becomes prey." John was pulled out to sea. The fish was huge. I told him not to tether the pole to himself, but he wouldn't listen. If only he hadn't put the keys in his pocket. The keys to what? The story appears to be clear. Looks like John was fishing. He caught a fish larger than he expected, but for some reason he tethered the fishing pole to himself. And when the fish pulled against the line, the fish pulled John out to sea. But what does it mean if only he hadn't put the keys in his pocket? The keys to what? The keys to a lock that was connecting the tether from the pole to his person? The keys to some sort of treasure? Why couldn't he fish the keys out of his pocket and unlock the lock while he's being dragged out to sea? That's interesting. I don't quite understand that part, but maybe finding the destination will make things clear. The compass marker sends you due east of the castle. Spectacle Island gets closer to the south, and we pass a number of floating shacks, which are interesting to explore in their own right. Just as you're about to reach Spectacle Island, you see an antenna sticking out of the water. Diving down, we find the wreckage of a small white boat. On top of the cabin is a detached skull. The owner of that skull is inside the cabin. We find its skeleton lying next to a green steamer trunk with another first aid kit on the wall. As always, looting the trunk ends the miscellaneous quest. But none of this makes any sense whatsoever. The name of the note was Predator Becomes Prey. The note talked about a man fishing for a large sea monster and being dragged out to sea. But instead, we find a man inside the wreckage of his own ship. Was his body also tethered to the ship, and the sea creature pulled the ship underwater? How did the man's skull get detached from his body? How did the skull get gingerly placed on top of the cabin? Maybe the man got eaten by whatever monster he had snared on his fishing line, and then the monster digested the body, excreting only the skeleton as waste. As the skeleton sank to the seafloor, the head detached from the body and landed on the cabin, while the body slipped down inside the cabin, conveniently next to a big steamer trunk filled with loot. But this doesn't explain why the note said that the man had his keys in his pocket. We don't find any clothing on the skeleton, and we certainly don't find any keys lying around, unless this skeleton does not belong to the man who got dragged out to sea by a sea creature, and instead belongs to the man who wrote the note. Maybe his friend had the keys to the boat in his pocket and got dragged out to sea, thus leaving the man who wrote the note stranded at sea. He can't turn the boat back on, and so he just drifts until storms and bad seas capsize the vessel, whereupon he sinks to the watery depths below and dies. That would explain why there are no keys here, but it doesn't explain why his skull got detached from his body and is lying on top of the cabin. So an interesting series of unmarked miscellaneous quests. I really enjoyed hunting down each of these bottles, but I have to admit that I was a bit disappointed at the end result for most of them. A few of them have interesting stories that make sense, but some of them are simple references to popular culture, and many of them don't seem to have any cohesive plot. Like, what about the man who ate his own hand? We never find him. We never learn whether or not he actually ate his hand, or he was hallucinating. What happened to his body? This entire series leaves us with more questions than it answers. This was a great opportunity for Bethesda to write an interesting little side quest for each of these little notes. But maybe they assumed that few people would find them. Maybe because of that, they felt they could get away with writing a note that simply said, "I'm screwed." At any rate, hunting for these bottles takes you to many interesting places and causes you to pass by interesting locations like the floating shacks near Spectacle Island, each of which is fun to explore and I'm sure tells its own story. What did you think of the 6 bottled messages that you find in Fallout 4? Did you find all 6? Were some of these new to you? Did you like them for the sake of the adventure, or did you think that it was a missed opportunity by Bethesda? Let me know in the comments below. I read all of your comments and I use your comments as inspiration for my future videos. I publish a new video like this every single day of the week, so be sure to subscribe so that you get notified the next time I publish a video. And if you'd like to chat about this topic with other like-minded individuals, be sure to click on that Discord invitation link in the description below, where you can join my Oxhorn Discord server. And if you like what I do and you want to support me in a more personal way, consider becoming one of my patrons on Patreon. Patreon subscribers get access to a private channel on my Discord server, as well as a bunch of other cool Oxhorn perks. But more than anything, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just so glad that you're here watching this video with me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow morning, bright and early as always, with a brand new video.